Hello, everyone. Welcome. Testing. Brilliant. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Barbican Centre and the Frobisher Auditorium. Congratulations for finding your way here. I know the Barbican can be a notoriously difficult venue to navigate. But for those of you, and there are many of you that navigate Scope 3 boundaries, that will be no problem at all. Perhaps it was the guides that you came across on the way here and the SBTi staff. I would actually like to start with a huge round of applause for everyone that was involved in organising this event. Very good. So I'm Alex Kazaglis. I'm Chief Strategy and Transformation Officer at SBTi. Another recognition to begin with, I'd like to mention our founding partners and a cheer of support there. So the UN Global Compact, WWF, CDP, and really what this is based on is their founding vision that was set out 10 years ago, which is the idea that voluntary corporate climate action could mean something real. And the idea that they had was that we might get to 100 companies for this ambitious scheme. And of course, as I think you might have seen, we've recently crossed the 10,000 and then the 11,000 threshold, fully 40% of global market capital. We're rapidly getting towards the majority of global corporate activity that is within the scheme. And what's striking, I think, about that number is how global it is. It's not a European or even a North American thing. 50% growth last year of our Chinese companies, Pakistan, Indonesia, South Korea, Taiwan, and the sector coverage as well. So it's not just focused on one sector, healthcare, IT, consumer durables. It really is truly global growth. But the context for companies has shifted. And when we started the scheme, it was about recognizing that action should happen and setting a level of ambition. But the question now is how, and how to deliver in different sectors. And our new strategy and the standard that gives it substance is a significant pivot for the SBTi, which we're going to hear about shortly. Ambition to action, we call it, and that's the name of the event today. So for the next 90 minutes, we're going to hear about what that means in practice from us, but it's not just about us. We've got to bring theory together with practice, and we'll be hearing from the companies and the other members of the ecosystem who help make this action happen in reality. As a personal reflection, since I've been in this role, what I found most inspiring about how the standard system is put together is how the ideas, many great ideas in the standard, but they don't come from us. They come from the consultation we do with businesses and what we can see happening on the ground in different sectors, in different contexts. And it really is that real-world delivery that powers the credibility of the standard, which we're going to hear about today. So let's get into it. So I would like to introduce opening remarks from Sanda Ojiambo, who is Assistant Secretary General and CEO of UN Global Compact, and is going to give us a compelling case for why corporate climate action is so important. Sanda, welcome onto stage.
Thank you, and good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to see a full room. So business leaders, colleagues, distinguished guests, it's a real pleasure today. And at first, I just want to start off by thanking David Kennedy for his strong leadership of SBTi in these very challenging times. Not only did you choose, a close to hottest day in London to bring us together to reflect, but also just want to thank you for continuing to lead the ship in times when many of the things that we believe in are often challenged. Over 10 years ago, as Alex had alluded to, a lot of us who've been on the screen, UN Global Compact with them launched the SBTi. Now, back then, as now, the mission was to engage companies in committing to ambitious science-based climate action and to offer a third-party validation of corporate emission targets aligned with the Paris Agreement. Sounded pretty simple, sounded pretty rational, but as I said, oftentimes these things get challenged. But today, SBTi has become mainstream, and companies worldwide are seeking to become more competitive, more responsible, and more resilient. So congratulations to everyone already involved. We've come a long way, but we know there's still a lot more to be done. The science is clear, but the funding. The one centigrade limit must remain our legal, political, and economic imperative, even as we face the probability, of overshooting this threshold over the next 5 years. But our responsibility now is to make that breach as small, as short, and as safe as possible. Allow me to share a few reflections from our work at UN Global Compact. Because first of all, this will require immediate and targeted action from all sectors of society, particularly business. So, few reflections just to kick us off for the afternoon. The first is that credibility and accountability are key to business transformation. Self-declared aspirations are never enough. That's exactly why the SBTi exists. We want commitments that are grounded in science, supported by near and long-term targets, and translated into real emission reduction. At the UN Global Compact, we're fortunate because through this 1,500 of our participating companies have set targets with SBTi, and they're typically making progress twice as fast as others. And that's why and the new net zero standard that we'll hear about later is so vital, because validated targets to build investor confidence, to strengthen resilience, and to support long-term business value. The second lesson is we must move much faster from commitment to implementation. Targets must become transition plans, and these plans should and must shape investment decisions, because these commitments will lead to measurable progress and results. So we have to embed climate ambition into governance, into strategy, into operations, and into supply chains. At the UN Global Compact, we've learned that equipping companies that have set science-based targets through our Climate Ambition Accelerator is truly important. The accelerator has helped train more than 4,000 companies from 90 countries. And this year, more than 40 of our country networks will use the accelerator to drive business action. So this does make sense. And finally, David, just to recommit, the UN Global Compact is poised to scale delivery. Strong multi-stakeholder collaboration is essential to maximizing the impact of the SBTi Net-Zero Standard. Global Compact has over 23,000 participating businesses in 160 countries, and we build bridges between companies, governments, and civil society to advance sustainable business. I think our work collectively must also ensure a just transition and be sure that we leave no one behind, because science can lead, but the people surely must follow. So really excited about the launch today of the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2.0. Global Compact is here to support you all and promote SBTi to continue to become more mainstream across continents and sectors. We know that implementation will not happen in isolation, and so then therefore also invite you to join our forthcoming work on collective action for climate and nature. We want to connect the dots between target setting, transition planning, policy advocacy, and transparency. So Net Zero Standard is planned, it's implemented, and it's delivered with integrity and ambition. For those in business, we truly believe that you have immense power to restore public trust, build a safer, more resilient, and more prosperous future for people in the planet. Thank you for the partnership. Thank you to all of the founding partners and those who believe and use the SBTi, because collectively we're working for a better world. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sanda. Okay, so the next step is to get David Kennedy onto stage. So David Kennedy has spent his career turning climate targets into deliverable trajectories, firstly as the inaugural CEO of the UK's Committee on Climate Change, leading the country towards putting together its roadmaps, and we see that the UK is now the fastest major economy in terms of its decarbonisation. Today, however, he's going to be talking about the new SBTi framework and how our standards are evolving from ambition into action. As well as that, David's going to invite onto stage Jim Andrews, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of PepsiCo, so we combine the actions and the standards with the real-world experience. PepsiCo, it's a brand we all know, but it's an incredibly complex supply chain operating in over 200 countries and hundreds of thousands of farms in its supply chain. So if they can do it, I think many other companies can too. Two practitioners, decades of experience. David, would you like to join me on stage? And then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Right, okay, look, thank you, Alex, and thanks, Sanda, as well, and good afternoon to everybody. So as Alex says, I'm going to say a few words about the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2 that we published the week before last, and I will touch on a couple of the key elements of our strategy, so particularly our support for implementation and our working in partnership with other organizations and companies. But let's start with where are we in the corporate net zero transition. And there was a sense that maybe this was slowing down and companies were stepping back, and the evidence says that is not the case. And so if you look at how many companies have SBTi validated targets, that is now 11,000. We had a bit of press around a 10,000 milestone in January this year, but it is now 11,000. Last year was a record year in terms of companies submitting targets of validation. So about 3,200 companies last year had their targets validated. We expect to do something similar this year, just looking at what has happened in the first half of the year and then looking at the pipeline for the rest of the year. So there is rapid growth in our network in the number of companies setting SBTi targets, and that is across all the different regions. So US remains very strong. We had about 300 US companies submitted targets for validation last year. We also have a lot of companies in Europe, in the UK, submitting targets, and then our fastest growing region is Asia. And in Asia, particularly fast growing countries are China, India, and Japan as well. So there was a sense actually that some companies would be dropping out, would be looking at their progress maybe towards targets and thinking it will be easier not to be part of SBTi anymore. That has not happened. So no companies are dropping out of SBTi. If we ask why, and I'm going to test this with Jim in a minute, but if we ask why do companies sign up, I think that's changed over time. And so there was a moment with Paris and a moment with Glasgow and a movement and a sense that companies wanted to join in and make their contribution. But I think now, if you're going to set targets and you're going to get your executive team and your board to agree to them, you have to have a very strong business case. And that business case is pretty apparent because we've got TCFD, and companies know that they face transition risks and that they have transition opportunities. So in a world that is going to be very different in 5 years, in 10 years, in 15 years' time, companies that don't do anything will have weakened resilience and will have undermined competitiveness. Turn it round, managing your transition risks and opportunities now makes sense. That will give you the business resilience that you need, and it will make you competitive, not just now, but in the future as well. So very strong business case to engage with the net zero transition. Why should you engage with the net zero transition through SBTi? Well, SBTi, and particularly Corporate Net Zero Standard version 2, is designed to support companies managing those transition risks and opportunities. And we published a piece a few months ago that was based on a survey of a number of companies who have set targets and what are the benefits they get. And there was a pretty consistent message, and that message was that you get increased strategic focus, long-term thinking if you've got an SBTi target. And again, I'll test this with you, Jim, but ideally that would be across the company. So it's not just a CSO thing. It's got to encompass the key players who will make things happen as we move from ambition to action. So that strategic focus, it unlocks cost savings. And so there are plenty of things that you can do that will save you money in a business now. And the obvious things are energy efficiency improvement and procurement of low-cost renewable electricity. I think the consistent theme was that companies have improved reputation, both with customers in their supply chains, in their value chains, but also with financial institutions. And then there is clear evidence that if you set science-based targets, you reduce emissions more quickly than if you haven't set them. So a whole range of benefits, and that's before we get to Corporate Net Zero Standard version 2. But I think those benefits of both engaging with the net zero transition and doing that via SBTi are more pronounced in a world where there is fossil fuel price volatility, as there is now, and high fossil fuel prices. So this is a great hedge to be on that low carbon path, on that net zero transition. Now, why did we feel that it was time to update Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 1? So I think 2 reasons. 1, we've got 10 years of experience, and 2, the world has changed and we're entering a new phase of ambition to action, as Alex said, and that is what our strategy is all about. And that is where Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2 takes us. Just a word on the process of how we got to what we published a couple of weeks ago. So we consulted widely. I think we had nearly 2,000 consultation responses, 2 consultations. I think we've piloted different aspects of the standard with over 300 companies, and we have had 100 members of expert working groups. That was company representatives, leading thinkers in the field, representatives of organizations. And I'd just like to say, I'm really proud of the team. We've got a lot of the team are here. Alberto and Emma, from a technical perspective, it's been a great pleasure to get to know these guys and to work with them. So impressive. But it's a whole organization effort, so I'd like to say I'm proud of the team, and thank you to everybody who has contributed to developing a standard which, I'm a bit biased, but I think it's a great standard. So let me pick out some of the key innovations. Thank you very much. So let me pick out 6 innovations of the standard, and I'm going to just cover them at a high level. But first one is that we introduce a company categorization. So there's a set of requirements that you have to fulfill under this standard if you are a large company in an advanced economy. And then there are options if you don't fall into that category. So if you're an SME in any country, or if you are a medium-sized company in a lower income country, then there's a bit more in terms of choice there. We recommend that you fulfill all of the requirements, but we give some choices and options. Second thing is that we have target setting methods and a wide range of target setting methods. That's really important to say, and we will never depart from the science. But these target setting methods align with the levers that companies have and the actions that they can and should be taking. And so we've got pathways that reflect trajectories for heat decarbonisation, for light vehicle decarbonisation. We've got sector pathways. We've got the engagement options. So get your supply chain to set science-based targets that have always been there. They continue in the framework. We've introduced a transition plan based way of setting targets that just allows for a different turnover of capital stock to a linear trajectory. And we've got best available technology benchmarks that you can use as well, particularly for your scope 3. Those will be very useful for some companies. So we've got target setting methods that align with levers and actions. So that's the second innovation. The third innovation is something we call the implementation hierarchy. So we've said, as has always been the case, you're trying to transform both your business and systems. You should have a focus on physical footprint, your operations, your traceable scope 3 supply chain emissions, and you should be driving those down using the different levers available. But in addition, it can make a really useful contribution to system transformation through, for example, buying green energy certificates. And somebody was saying, does biomethane really count for scope 1? Yes, we're going to put out the conditions under which that counts. So there are some integrity criteria, but it does count. Sustainable aviation fuels, green commodity certificates for steel, for cement, and whatever. So that is part of the implementation hierarchy. You can do something not in your supply chains at activity pool levels. You can do it at sector levels. So a lot of opportunity for both business but also system transformation as well. The fourth innovation is to reframe the net zero transition as a continuous improvement process where you are working towards 2040, if it's electricity, 2050 as your net zero date. The transition is difficult, non-linear, it's messy, and it is a process of learning, reviewing, assessing, course correcting, and being very transparent. And we put structure on what is it that you are supposed to report in this world where transparency has a big premium. And it's about progress. It's also about barriers and what you are doing to address those barriers as well. So that's the fourth thing. The fifth thing, and it's related, is a best efforts framing of target setting. So if this is a continuous improvement journey, to net zero, what does it mean to have a target, say, for 2030? Now, that target is aims what you should be doing. It is an ambition. You should aim to deliver it. But we now explicitly recognize that these actions that you will take to deliver emissions reductions are contingent on dependencies and highly uncertain in many cases. So what we say is you should make best efforts, which means you should use all available to drive down emissions. But if for reasons beyond your control, you are not able to deliver a target, then we don't expect you to do something that is beyond your control. So there is an opportunity to set again what you are doing, to highlight the barriers, and to course correct and reset targets. You can stay in the SBTi framework, turn it round. I think people were worried if you'd done everything but you hadn't quite met your target, and particularly in scope 3 where it's really difficult, isn't it? We would kick you out of the SBTi framework. We're not going to do that if you are serious about the net zero transition. We want you to be a partner. Sixth innovation is the ongoing emissions responsibility. So we need a lot of removals if we are to achieve climate objectives. We need to accelerate emissions reductions in developing countries in particular. And so carbon markets, which unlock the finance for all of this, have a really important role to play. Now, we are very clear that we are about net zero transition. That is about reducing your own footprint, transforming your business, transforming your systems. And credits can never be a substitute for that. But they can be a complement. And so this is why we've got the ongoing emissions responsibility, that for companies who see value in contributing and helping to develop those carbon markets, which are needed, then we will recognize it, we will give it a legitimacy, and that combined with the increasing integrity that we will have, we already have, and it's growing all of the time in carbon markets. We're going to have a net to talk about that in a minute. Those two things combined, I think, will unlock some significant demand, and we'll have to watch that very closely, but significant demand for credits and high integrity credits in particular through our ongoing emissions responsibility. So those are the different aspects. We've got company categorization, range of target setting methods that are action focused. We've got an implementation hierarchy. We have got a continuous improvement framing. We've got a best efforts framing, and we've got ongoing emissions responsibility. A couple more things to say, and then I'm going to invite Jim up. So first is, people have said, are we moving away from the greenhouse gas protocol? And it wasn't helped. I think there was an article in, remember, it was the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times that said, yeah, we've departed on market-based instruments and scope 2 approaches as well. The answer is we remain very closely in partnership with the greenhouse gas protocol. We take our lead from them. We are moving slightly ahead on the market-based instruments in particular, but we will have, I hope, if he can make it here on time, we will have Tim, the new CEO of the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, to have a conversation with me. They are a very strong partner for us, and we remain fully aligned. We put a statement out a few weeks ago about that, and we will come back to it, as I say, when Tim joins me on the stage a little bit later on. People have said about ISO. So ISO had its launch event this morning for their net zero standard. And do we see that as competition? The answer is no, we don't see it as competition. ISO has a huge reach and works with multiples of the companies that we work with at the moment, and I think can be a very useful complement to the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2. So we are working closely with ISO. I think it will be particularly attractive for SMEs. I think it will be particularly attractive to companies in developing countries where there is a later net zero year as an option in the ISO standard. I think it will be used by companies. We may do dual validation of ISO and SBTi at the same time, but again, we work in partnership with ISO. I think version 1, version 2, if there are people in the audience, I'm sure there are, who've got a version 1 target thinking, wow, all these innovations, do I need to set a version 2 target, or shall I stick with my 2030 target? We've set this out. If you go on our website, all of these innovations are pulled through to version 1. So if you've got a target already, or if you're well advanced in preparing to submit a target for validation, you should do it under version 1, and version 1 will stay open until the end of 27. You get the best of both worlds then. There are some flexibilities in version 1 that remain attractive as a starter for companies that are yet to engage with the net zero transition, and then you will lay the foundation and we'll move on for the next cycle. If you've got a 2030 target, I would say in 2028, that is the time to be thinking about setting the next cycle, which is 30 to 35, so that you've got plenty of lead time to then plan and implement what become more difficult actions as we get into the 2030s. In terms of next steps, there will be various guidance that we're going to publish over the next months before the end of the year. So we have committed, we will publish guidance on energy certificates, and that will cover the biomethane and the SAF, for example. We will also publish guidance on the projects subsection of the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2, so what is going to count in terms of projects. We will give a sense of what will count from a commodity certificate perspective as well. I've talked about best available technology, for example, and certificates that correspond to that, so we'll set that out. And then we will also set out some of the recognition approaches, particularly for the ongoing emissions responsibility. So we will recognize other organizations that are in the integrity space. We're not going to invent integrity accreditation approaches ourselves where really good ones already exist. Two last things just to finish off with. So our strategy, which is all about ambition to action, and what I've talked about is target setting and then the process of working towards targets. You know, people have said to us as we consulted on our strategy, you know, we set targets with you and then it's like, bye-bye, we'll see you in 5 years. What about in between? And who can tell us what is happening? And who can bring and coalesce companies and other organizations around the implementation challenges and opportunities of the corporate net zero transition? So we have concluded, based on that feedback, we are really well placed to play a leading role supporting implementation. It's well defined. We're not going to mark the homework of individual companies, but what we are going to do is use our position at the heart of the system, our network, our trusted relationships. We will gather data, not in a burdensome way, but we think we can get some key data points that we will use for assessment, for insights that will support collaborative, on the one hand, learning, and two, problem solving in a pre-competitive space for companies. So that is an area that we will grow into over the next months, and we'll kick that off with a set of engagements that we're going to do across some of the harder to abate sectors. So we're about to kick off a steel, an aluminium, and a flag review together with aviation, shipping, and that will just be the start. There will be various other engagements, and we are asking companies to work with us on the framework and the leading indicators as well, the data requirements for assessing progress. The very last thing is, I've said it already, but I'll say it again because it's so important, we will work in partnership. That is a key element of our strategy. So we have a set of things that we can bring to the table, but there are so many other organizations. I think the feedback is, well, it could be all a bit more joined up. It's a bit confusing. We're being asked for two things that are slightly different. We're being asked for the same thing twice. So interoperability is the motif for us as we go forward. Partnerships, one around a compelling narrative about this net zero transition that makes economic sense and contributes to climate objectives, and then interoperability at the level of particular areas, so accounting through to reporting, through to integrity frameworks and whatever. That's all I've got to say. So I'll just summarize, and we have got a lot of momentum to build on in the corporate net zero transition. We've got a lot of momentum because it makes economic sense in the world we're in, where most of the countries are committed and putting policy frameworks and driving towards very stretching emissions reductions targets and economic transformation. So it makes economic sense. We are moving from ambition to action. I've gone through, I'm not going to repeat the 6 innovations. I hope you've got a sense of those, but we have got a standard that will drive and support that ambition to action. And we stand ready not just to be a partner for that part of the net zero transition journey, so the target setting, but right through the end-to-end partner, unlocking that value for and with you in the ways I've said, in partnership and through implementation support as well. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Right, okay, Jim, do you want to come and join me on the stage? You're going to walk round or leap up there.
There's some
EHS professionals in the room would prefer I walk around. So.
Right, okay. So Jim will be familiar to many of you. He has stood out to me in my first year at SBTi as really leading some highly innovative initiatives to drive down emissions at Pepsi, and not just in the Pepsi company, but in the supply chains and value chains and in the wider landscapes, particularly for Flag that Pepsi operates. And I know he's seen as a leader by many in the world of corporate sustainability. So great to have you here, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you, David. That means I have a great team, and so appreciate the chance to be here.
Yes. So first question from me, Jim, is I have talked about the business case for the corporate net zero transition. I've said there's short-term cost savings. Some of the stuff, you know, the payback is longer term, if you're looking at Flag in particular, I guess. But, you know, why don't you share your experience? Is there a strong business case? Why are you actually doing this?
Yeah, you know, I think it's all about risk and value. It's about how do we manage risk and how do we create value. And it's everything from strengthening resilience to protecting our supply chain to responding to market and stakeholder pressures to remaining competitive in a carbon-constrained world. And when you put all those things together, right, you really start to talk about core business investments. What SBTi does is it gives a common, externally validated standard, and that's really important. It's really important for credibility externally, but it's also really important for credibility internally. And you mentioned, and Alex did, you know, PepsiCo, you think of us as a very large beverage company, and of course we are, but we're actually a much larger food company. We source 50 major crops, 60 major countries. We've got about 300,000 farmers in our direct and indirect supply chain. So the food system, the health of the food system, the resilience of the food system, that is fundamental to our business. So when I talk with our executive committee, our board, our business leaders, it's about resilience. It's about how the food system has to be able to respond to climate change and climate pressures, which we know continue, but also the risks that are still coming. And, you know, for us, ag is not just, and Flag, it's a core part of the solution. Yes, we all know the numbers around what % of emissions, depending on how you look at it, come from the ag system, but it's also a huge part of the solution. And you talked about removals. You know, that's one of the big areas where we're very active, is both how do we mitigate the impact through things like low carbon fertilizer and working with partners there, but also removals. And again, fundamentally for us, it's about how do you make that supply chain more resilient while still keeping that supply chain productive, because we need farmers to keep farming. We need them to make a living. We need the next generation to come into farming. And we need those farmers to be able to deal with all of the challenges that are in this world. So all those things to us go into how we think about what we're doing, how we're investing. And, you know, our overall transformation is called PepsiCo Positive, as you know, but one of the 3 pillars is positive agriculture. Our SBTi target, our Flag target, is a core part of that positive agriculture pillar, because that's one of the things I use to motivate the organization to be able to make the progress, make the investments, move forward. So for us, just to sort of wrap it up, growth, resilience, can't be separated. They're core to anything that we do in business, and therefore that's why this is so important. It's you know, it's not part of the strategy, it is the strategy.
Great, okay. So it makes business sense in different ways is what I'm hearing from you. Related question, you've hinted at this already, but in terms of the SBTi target, so great to have a standard to which you can work. SBTi targets tend to be owned by CSOs within companies. We've been very clear in Corporate Net-Zero Standard V2.0 that you've got to have broader ownership. This has to be embedded in commercial strategy. if you've got a transition plan, the transition plan needs to be part of your strategy. It's not a separate thing. Do you want to just talk a little bit about the company ownership of the SBTi target and the net zero strategy?
Yeah, great point. I think, I grew up in a family that has small business, and, the conversation at the dinner table is always about two things. I've got two brothers. The first very short conversation was, how are the three boys doing in school? Hopefully the answer was good, good, good. The rest of the conversation was about the business. And I learned very quickly, companies really only have to do two things. They got to make stuff and they got to sell stuff. Everything else is sort of optional. Now, a lot of those things are important to making and selling, but you get the point. And I think ownership ultimately has to sit with the board and the CEO, because it's not making, it's not selling. It's related to those things, of course. I'm very fortunate. I work at a very large company. PepsiCo is about $95 billion in revenue. We've got 300 plus around the world. But the board and my boss are critical and understand the importance of what we're trying to do. Now, what I do is I wake up every day and I worry about what are we going to do, how are we going to get it done, but they ultimately own it, because otherwise it's not going to work, And when I was at, I don't know if I was being asked or told, but you get the idea. My real committed are you really? And I'd already worked for Ramon for years, so I knew. But that got to the gist of it. I think they own it. I own it. Believe me, I wake up every day and I worry about it with a very talented team. How are we going to move it forward? But a big piece of what I do is, how do you get it embedded in the business? What I call the machinery. Every company has machinery. It's everything from capital, right? I sit on the corporate level. Capital. If you're going to make an investment above a certain threshold, it comes to a group on which I sit, and if I don't approve it, it won't get approved. And what I'm looking for is, what are the sustainability criteria, so that, because we have 2030 goals, we have goals that are further out, if we're going to build a new factory, that's 30, 40-year investment. I don't want to be creating a problem for someone on water or climate or something else that somebody down the road is going to have to deal with and look back at us and go, what were they thinking? They weren't thinking anything. No, so we build in the requirement to be able to meet our standards as a part of that original capital allocation. We have it in our executive compensation. We have it, in a lot of different places throughout the company, because if I can get it into the machinery, it becomes much more a part of who we are. It becomes a much more a part of the day-to-day decision-making. I get to team up with a lot of other people that are going to help me do my work, because, take capital allocation. There's a whole group of people from finance, and they run that thing like a Swiss watch, a train, to make sure everything's on time. All I want are the 2 pages that talk about the sustainability requirements. They manage the whole rest of it. That's great for me. So again, it's like, how do you embed, and where do you want to push? Because a big part of what we do is, once we've created visibility, once we've created awareness that it's important for the business, if we're doing our job, the next question we get is, how are you going to help me? Yep. What are you going to do? And so, I always tell the team, if all we do is help people realize there's a problem, we've only done about 10% of our job. What we need to do, it's an important part, but what we need to do is, why does this matter to me, and what are you going to do about it? How are you going to help me solve that issue? Because if you're telling me that there's going to be a drought in a particular area over the next 5 years, or the probability is much higher, what do? Well, we have set of regenerative agriculture programs. We have partners that we can work with. We can do things on watershed. Okay, now we're in problem-solving mode. Now we're helping advance the business. We're going to bring in 4 new partners, and we're going to reduce the cost. Now you're helping me with business problems. Because at the end of the day, we found that the best success is when these become business questions, not sustainability questions. So I'm the one who wakes up about it every day, but I got a whole lot of friends that I'm trying to make sure are waking up and thinking about it too, and our job is to help them.
Yep. I love what you say there. So this is business questions, not sustainability. That's the way it's got to be. And I think from what you've said, there's a golden thread in Pepsi, which is there is a strong business case which people get, which creates the ownership, but it needs the energy then to embed. And that energy has to be a positive energy, a problem-solving, rather than giving other people problems to solve that they don't.
Yeah, you maybe do a little bit of both. You give them a problem to solve, but then you help them solve it.
Yeah. So it sounds like you are an exemplar in the ambition to action, and that is great.
I mean, at the end of the day, if it doesn't show up on the ground, I travel a great deal, and people say, "Why do you travel?" Our headquarters is in Purchase, New York. People say, "Why do you travel so much?" I say, "Because not much happens in Purchase." The work happens on the ground in countries around the world with teams. I was out in Reading today where our UK and Ireland team is headquartered, and I was out there meeting with them, and we were talking about climate, we were talking about water, we were talking about all of our pillars around it, because that's where the work's happening. Those are the people doing the work. So yes, it's ultimately, it's got to translate, as you said. You can have an ambition, it's got to translate into action that has impact on the ground, or it's just sort of an interesting theoretical thing, and that's not why any of us come to work.
Exactly. Now, can you bring it to life? We're talking about ambition to action. What are some of the key actions that you are taking in your operations and then in your supply chains as well?
Yeah, how long you got?
Only a couple of minutes.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just maybe literally give you one or two, and I'm happy to talk later. And we have a goal ambition to be able to bring regenerative practices or restore and protect to 10 million acres around the world. That does a whole lot of things. It helps build resilience in our supply chain, helps address issues around nature because farmers need a thriving natural ecosystem. We're doing all the work for you. That maybe you just cried. That's why we get up. We make sure that the soil can grow healthier, that there can be resilience. That goal is something that we use to drive the organization. So in 2024, we were at 3.5 million acres. Very, very, very soon, we're going to report 2025 number. It's a lot more than the 2024 number. I think I'm allowed to say that. Anyway, it's headed in the right direction. So we're making progress on that. That's a great area. And we do that with a lot of partners. And there's a lot of people in this room that we partner with because, I always say sustainability is a team sport. Anything we're doing, we got to do. So we work at a landscape level. I just was at a panel talking on nature where we were talking with P&G and with Lasari Capital around an organization called Rimba Collective in Palm Forest. But we also do the same thing in watersheds. We work at a watershed level to make sure we have watershed health because that, if I'm using a lot of water and you're not, you still have a problem. So how do we address those things? We're doing a lot of work on our Scope 1 and Scope 2 around renewable electricity. We have a program around the world, which is now in 6 different countries called PepsiCo Positive Renew. And it's really about how do we educate our suppliers, so into our Scope 3, and we've got over 10,000 suppliers. How do we educate them about renewable electricity? But then also, how do we make it easy for them to do things like PPAs? And anybody who's ever done a PPA, the mountain of paperwork that can create. And when you start to talk about bringing other countries, but that's something we can do. So we're trying to hit the easy button for our small and medium size suppliers and even large suppliers to be able to become a part of an aggregated buy. We just recently announced one here in Europe to repower a wind farm down in Spain with 3 or 4 of our suppliers to be able to aggregate our demand and then actually go make that happen. So there's things, renewable electricity, regenerative agriculture, watershed, and a lot of others, but I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Well, okay. For anybody who's not read the detail, this is going to be most people of the Scope 2 approach. That is very much allowed under Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2. So aggregating load across deliverability regions and then signing one PPA, for example, in Spain or Texas, if you're in North America, makes a lot of sense. And we've got Schneider in the audience who arrange a lot of those deals. That is part of it. I'm going to finish by just saying and asking you, you've talked about all these actions. How does Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2 help you? And is there anything you still need from us?
Again, how much time you got? No. And a good shout out to Schneider, because we've been working with Schneider as part of these PPAs, GAs and part of Renew. So again, takes the whole team. I think a couple of things, you know, in terms of the corporate net zero standard, great that you've made progress. We really appreciate the process because you mentioned it, you know, the engagement process. We were part of the expert working group. We were one of the pilot companies. We submitted probably more comments than your team might have wanted. But again, to their credit, and I know you shouted it out, we really appreciate it. Great team. They listened a lot. And I think if you look at over the last couple of years, it's become much more clear, much more specific. And so really applaud the process, the engagement, the willingness to listen, which I would say, you know, if you haven't listened to SBTi lately, you haven't listened, because they've really changed, David, you know, under your leadership, candidly, it's changed a lot. So we really appreciate that. What do we still need? I would say a couple things. You know, we were pleased to see the recognition of project accounting. That's great. I think that the claim policy is an area where there's still a little bit more work to do. We need more clarity around the activity pool and sector actions and how they count, because that'll give people the confidence to invest. And you know, I know that's something you want, that's something we want, so we're all on the same page there. Guidance to operationalize some of those things, again, activity pool, sector action, adopting third-party quality criteria, you just mentioned it, hats off to you, because no need to reinvent that. And then finally, I think just the continuing to ensure interoperability, and I know Tim's going to be up here on GHGP and other super, you know, the physical inventory, the market-based inventory, and then finally the impact statement. And the last thing I would say is just if you can refer to, I know the AIM work is still underway, but again, referring to that, clarifying how statements and subcomponents are going to count towards SBTi, we would certainly appreciate. But again, big step forward. We really appreciate it. And again, appreciate the collaboration, appreciate the willingness to listen, the flexibility, because the ability to have a trusted, independently verifiable third party helps the entire ecosystem move forward in a way that is so important and so powerful.
Wonderful. So let's just repeat what you said, which was a shout out to the team again, who have listened, who have engaged. And that is the way forward for the organization. So we are a partner, we do listen, we engage, we work together. All of the things, let's not go through them one by one, really important, and nearly all of them, I didn't say the claim system, we are working on that. Nearly all of these will be done by the end of the year, if not before. So Jim, can I say thank you for being a wonderful partner. Thanks for being here this afternoon.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, David. Thanks so much, Jim. I thought what was really interesting about some of that discussion is what happens when companies start to hit up against barriers in their own supply chain. And we heard from Jim working with the watershed around them, working with other companies so that they know how to strike the PPAs that they need. This idea that when you come up against barriers, you don't stop. You help to build the system around you and then return to your own chain. And I think that's a really interesting idea cutting across what we're hearing today, this idea that leadership is no longer just setting a high ambition, it's being honest about the barriers and then building the system that removes those barriers so that you can achieve them in your own chain over time, if not immediately. So I suspect some of the companies that are going to join on the stage in a few minutes, that will be a recognizable pattern. And we're going to hear from businesses that are true practitioners. We're going to also hear from some of the integrity infrastructure that goes around that. And so this really is the system coming together. Anna Terrell is going to lead the discussion. Anna is both a trustee of the SBTi and Chief Sustainability Officer at Mars. I think her career has really sat at the intersection of designing the system and doing it in practice. In short, the perfect person to lead this discussion. So Anna, welcome you on stage.
No pressure. Right, what an introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to London and this beautiful weather that is very uncharacteristically not British. As Alex said, I'm Anna. I'm Global Chief Sustainability Officer at Mars Snacking and also a board member of SBTi and the Services Board as well. And in taking on that additional responsibility last year, what I didn't appreciate was that I would also become a corporate climate therapist for many colleagues in other businesses, which is great. So anyone needs to have a chat, you know where I am afterwards, come find me. But maybe just before I ask this brilliant panel to join me on the stage, I just want to kind of do a little quick poll. So if you represent a business, you work for a company, can you just put your hand up? Amazing. Keep your hands up if you have got or you're thinking about setting science-based targets. Amazing, okay. Keep your hand up if you have ever worried about how you are going to deliver on your science-based targets. Oh, hands have gone up. Okay, all right, that's interesting. Yeah, I feel you. You're in good company. Thank you for that. So what today is really designed to do, and the panel that we're about to have, is to talk a little bit about the practical implementation of science-based targets, and also a bit about the evolution from version 1 of the standard to version 2. And as we've heard from David, from Jim, and others, this focus on pragmatism at a time when actually getting stuff done in the world is incredibly complex. And so the version 2 of the standard is really a brilliant opportunity for those of us that are really at the coalface of implementing science-based targets and delivering decarbonization across our corporate value chains, to actually do so in a way that hopefully gives us a little bit more space to breathe, as well as opportunity to maybe form alliances and partnerships that perhaps we hadn't considered before when we were thinking a little bit more siloed in the context of our own business operations. So let's hear more from our brilliant panel. And of course, this is where the tech escapes me. I'm just going to turn around. You can see this. So we are joined by Annette Nazareth, who's the chair of ICVCM, and will give us some brilliant opening remarks. Natalie Alkia, CSO from Danone. Esther Finadori, CSO from Schneider Electric. And Preeti Srivastav from Asahi Group Holdings. So please, ladies, brilliant, please join me on the stage. Very narrow stage. Yes, perfect. Thanks, Alex. Okay, well, thank you so much for taking the time. I think before we get into, the corporate implementation, we're going to hear a little bit about the voluntary carbon market space and really this moment that we're in, Annette. Help us as businesses and other stakeholders in the room just to understand a little bit more about where we're at, the opportunities in front of us, and maybe give us a little bit of comfort about what we can expect. So opening remarks from you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Anna, and thank you so much to SBTi for inviting me to make a few remarks. As a fellow standard setter, I very much appreciated David's comments, particularly the process that you went through, and I think the success of your latest document on Corporate Net-Zero Standard reflects the fact that you did use the best practices, notice and comment. You took many meetings, I'm sure. You took into account the views of all your members, and you took into account the views of other standard setters, which is even more impressive from my perspective. So very, very much appreciate that. So as Anna said, I'm Annette Nazareth, and I'm the chair of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. And as you probably know, we were established to set the quality threshold for high-integrity carbon credits. And we did that through our 10 core carbon principles. I won't go through the 10 principles the way David so effectively went through his 6 points, but our mission is really very straightforward. It was that when carbon credits are used, they represent real, measurable, independently verified climate mitigation and provide confidence to buyers, investors, governments, the market in general. Since launching the CCPs, we've made really significant progress toward this goal. I'm proud to say we've assessed all major carbon crediting programs and methodologies representing over 45% of the market by issuance. But today I don't want to focus on our quality standards and the credits themselves, but more importantly, why this moment matters. We all know, and I don't need to go through all the facts and figures, that the climate crisis is enormous, that we need to get emissions reductions of 80% by 2050. We have a significant amount of work to do. We also need significantly more finance flowing to mitigation activities around the world if we're going to remain on track to address our global climate goals. And that's why I'm so pleased to see the direction of travel of the Corporate Net-Zero Standard V2.0 and SBTi's broader 2026-2030 strategy. David mentioned it, but I can't emphasize it enough, how important it is, we believe, that the draft recognizes something that many stakeholders have been discussing for years, which is that direct emissions reductions and mitigation beyond the value chain are not competing priorities. We need both. Companies must continue to focus first and foremost, and we've always said this. Everyone thinks that, ICVCM, we're in the credit business, we must be emphasizing those first. Absolutely not. First and foremost, we have to reduce emissions within our own operations and value chains. That remains the cornerstone, no question about it. But at the same time, we need mechanisms that encourage companies to support additional mitigation activities beyond their value chains and to take responsibility for the emissions that remain today while they continue on their decarbonization journey. So what makes the ongoing emissions responsibility program so impactful, I believe, is that it's a very important contribution to that discussion. What's particularly encouraging is that the draft does not treat carbon credits as a substitute for decarbonization. Of course not. Rather, it places them within a structured program that maintains the primacy of direct emissions reductions while creating a pathway for companies to contribute additional climate finance and to take responsibility for all their emissions. So from our perspective at the Integrity Council, that was exactly the type of clarity that companies have been seeking. Companies need confidence, not only in the quality of credits they support, but also in how those outcomes fit within a credible climate strategy. And these are related but distinct questions. So the role of the Integrity Council has been very clearly to provide confidence in the integrity of the underlying credits, and we do that through our CCPs and our general assessment framework. The role of SBTi is highly complementary, and we are very supportive of their work because it provides guidance on how companies should prioritize emissions reductions and how carbon credits can be used within a credible corporate climate framework. The other thing that we're very pleased about was the recognition, and again, David mentioned this in his remarks, that we're not duplicating efforts. There is so much to do in this space, and I think we're making such great progress. But one thing that we don't need to do is duplicate efforts. And it was very gratifying to see that the SBTi sort of recognized that there are other standard setters that are addressing the integrity issue, and that that's not something that SBTi is going to take on its own. And having spent 4 years doing this, I can tell you it was not an easy task, so that was a smart thing to do. But that's why, we're just so excited about what SBTi has done and the work that we can do together. Ultimately, our shared objective is very straightforward: more decarbonization, more mitigation, more climate finance, and greater confidence that all of these efforts are delivering real-world climate impact. So the revised corporate net zero standard is such an important step in that direction, and we really look forward to continuing to work with SBTi with you as your important work progresses. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annette. That was fantastic. And we're going to come back to you in a moment, if I may do that. But first, we're going to turn to our CSOs on the panel. Now, we're not under Chatham House rule today, but in the spirit of radical transparency, I would love for you to share your thoughts and reflections around actually what it means to start approaching implementation of the corporate net zero standard, but also as we look ahead to version 2. So maybe, Natalie, if I can start with you. Could you perhaps give us one piece of advice to a company preparing to implement the corporate net zero standard version 2 tomorrow? Where would you tell them to start? And what challenge or challenges should they anticipate?
Well, vast question, but so we are proud at Danone to be one of the first having signed with the SBTi target version 1, of course, and very happy to see the positive move in the standard version 2. So first of all, understand where the carbon sits in the full scope, and honestly for us it's 95% is scope 3. So when you start from there, so we are doing super hard on scope 1 and 2, reducing already by 40%, which is, I think, really great. But this is only, the tip of the iceberg. Then you really have to attack the rest, and this is where, of course, the challenge sits, meaning that you need to embark so many people. For us, for instance, we have, of course, we are an agri-business, so there are 60,000 farmers behind this scope 3, which means a tremendous effort to embark. And here, for us, what is maybe the piece of advice is choose your battle, where you can start. And for us, we decided that, for instance, dairy farming, when you look at really which is the big offender, is certainly an area to focus on. And inside that, we are operating in actual operation in more than 55 countries in all the continents. Of course, the carbon footprint per liter of milk can vary considerably between some developing countries to the most developed one. And so here, maybe the things which are eventually, well, at the end, very hard to attack, which is, for instance, the smallholder in Morocco can also, if you move that, provide a tremendous progress. So we decided to go for really on-the-ground activities with the suppliers directly, embarking NGOs to support us, embarking, I would say, blended finance if possible, and promoting and disseminating the knowledge so that to have new practices with tremendous progress in just a few years on what is really the carbon attached to milk in such and such country. So indeed, choosing some battle, making it real, getting maybe and attacking even the biggest thing. But I think that SBTi in this context is like a guiding star, because you know that what you are looking for, and everything adds up nicely into a carbon footprint, and you can measure effort, and for that create a big momentum inside the company towards what looks like a success.
Brilliant, thank you, Natalie. And I think, I think also what is helpful is when you have companies that are aligned in application of the science-based targets of the Corporate Net-Zero Standard that can also come together in partnerships. So a bit of a plug, I think, for Mars and Danone now working together in a space that probably only a few years ago we would say was competitive, and actually now we're starting to lean in. And so many companies here, Jim's already mentioned Schneider Electric as well, you know, that there are these opportunities to collaborate pretty competitively when we have alignment with the standards that we are employing. So Esther, maybe coming to you, coming at this from a different sector, how have you found approaching implementing Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 1, and how are you thinking about version 2 as you look ahead? Any guidance for companies?
So a few ideas here. First thing is we're really happy to see version 2 come out. I think we all felt the need for having this new version that will help us move forward. And honestly, having a common framework we can all refer to with our C-level, with our CEO, with our boardroom helps immensely. So no pressure, David, no pressure SBTi team, but we really need you to make this right, because it's really help unlock some decisions. So we needed the version 2. What I like really much, very much about, honestly, we're not able to model our CO2 emissions from now to 2050. The world will change at a pace, at a depth that we don't know yet of, and internally, we have major technology disruptions ahead that I cannot model. So the 2050 commitment is aspirational. What we need, what really helps the machine going, is interim targets. We in Schneider run on 5-year plans. With a 5-year target, you can go to the board, you can get validation of a CapEx plan, of a transformation plan that will help you meet those targets. So 5-year is a very operational time frame to get action going. Second thing that I really like is the, let's say, pragmatic way the framework will allow to differentiate the approach. Of course, it's easier to communicate, to have a standalone, one-size-fits-all target covering all of your emissions. But when you go internally, this is just not how you drive change. To drive change, you need to slice and dice different levers, eco-design, responsible material sourcing, supplier engagements. And you also need to be very pragmatic in order to be able to localize in every country where you operate. For instance, Schneider, in France, I consume 100 gigawatt hour of electricity. There are 10 countries in Europe where I consume under 1 gigawatt hour of electricity. I need to be able to have market instruments to source renewable that will be available both in France, where I'm a big off-taker of the electricity grid, as well in those 10 other European countries where I'm smaller, but I need coverage. The ability to be very flexible and to acknowledge all the market instruments that we need in order to deploy is very much needed, not just to have small SMEs join us, but as well for large corporations to be able to deploy everywhere they operate and with every type of activity. So the slice and dice pragmatic approach was very much needed to get us all in action. And the last one I really like was not mentioned so much because so far I've been repeating a lot of what Jim said, but still, is the focus on data credibility, data quality, data assurance. Jim mentioned that now he has performance managed by finance. This is true for me as well, and let me tell you how demanding this is, but how great it is. Finance jobs is to manage performance in a company. If you can get the finance team to manage as well extra financial performance, honestly, your job will be much easier. But to get that, you need very high quality data that follows data golden rules, that goes through data controls, that can fit in your data structure and data auditability in the group. And you need the data to be embedded in the data system of the group and not sitting on the side. You need that data to be able to be managed by entity, by manager, by managing unit, whatever is your matrix organization. This transformation of data is really something that's a bit painful to go through, honestly, but that it's immensely worthwhile. And I think that by demanding high quality data, SBTi is helping all of us prepare ourselves for the data that will be the backbone of performance management and not just the data that supports reporting. So these would be my few takeaways. that I believe will make the version 2 a real support for us to operationalize.
Brilliant. Thank you, Esther. Super tangible. And I think you also ended on what's an opportunity and a challenge of embedding data cross-functionally in performance management processes. At least, certainly, I find that sometimes. Brilliant. Priti, over to you. Your thoughts and reflections, advice that you would give to companies that are starting to consider their corporate net zero journey and version 2, and any challenges or watch-outs that you would like to share based on your experience at Asahi.
I'm in no position to give you advice. I think we're all in the same boat. We're all going through the same challenges. All I can share is we had our board meeting on Monday on sustainability investments, and SBTi V2 came out on Friday, and I was like, hallelujah. I wish it had come out on Monday, because that's the level of detail and nuance and direction we need as a corporate to move forward, not just for 2030 and beyond. And if just to share where I'm coming from, Asahi is a food and beverage company, 20 billion in revenues. You may know us from Peroni or Asahi Super Dry or a couple other brands, depending on which country you're in. So we're in multiple markets with more than 100 brands. And what we felt was that the beauty of V2 was in the fact that it's about implementation. It's about making the foundation right. So you can't get to 2040, 2050, forget 2030 if you have not integrated sustainability within your organization. If your entire leadership is not accountable already, it's too late. But I think before you dive headfirst into V2, I would really recommend taking time to build the foundation, do the groundwork. We spoke about finance. We have sustainability in finance because we have an internal carbon price and a sustainable EBITDA. Our marketing folks care about it because they have a packaging target, because they decide what type of packaging goes. Our R&D is looking at sustainability because they're looking at what V2 has in it, what are the challenges in the market, which technologies are not scalable. So making sure that you've integrated it, which makes it a challenge for a CMO and a CFO, not just the CSOs, is essential, I feel. And we felt that that wasn't cutting it enough, so we connected the bonuses of our leadership with the sustainability targets. And trust me, it really moved the needle. But I think that foundation is essential because V2 comes with so many nuances and so many details. And David mentioned biomethane a couple of times. Mea culpa, it was me, hounding him about the biomethane, because we are a manufacturing company. And for us, renewable heat is a big thing. It's not glamorous, but it's a big thing. So, these are the details that will help us implement V2 better, but we need to get the foundation right.
Great, thank you so much. And I think this point around not letting perfect be the enemy of the good is really important, because for those of us that are responsible for oversight and delivery of our climate commitments and science-based targets, oftentimes it can feel quite hard, particularly when you look outside of companies and there's noise and there's pressure and expectation to do more, quicker, faster, better, bigger. But actually, it's really just about kind of getting on, breaking it down into the chunks that you can do and control, and also influence, and then start thinking about those ecosystems within which you operate. Which kind of brings me on, Annette, back to kind of your opening remarks, really, because the Corporate Net-Zero Standard creates a role for companies to take responsibility for ongoing emissions through the use of high integrity carbon credits. From your perspective, what's needed to ensure companies have confidence both in the quality of the carbon credits they support and in how those outcomes fit with a credible corporate climate strategy?
Thank you. Well, thanks for that question. Your question really has two parts, right? I mean, one is the asset, right? The underlying credit, and the fact that that has to be high integrity. We've always said that this market should not scale unless there's integrity. Integrity has to come first. And what I think is an important achievement of the Integrity Council is that we are getting increasing, recognition for the integrity that our core carbon principles have brought to the market. We're actually seeing that through market-based approaches. I mean, we're seeing that core carbon principle labeled credits are trading at a premium, which means that corporates like many who are represented in this room would rather pay more for a credit that they have confidence in and that they believe is appropriate, and that they can go to their board and say, you know, that we did diligence and we have this, you know, check. What SBTi does, obviously, is it's provided guidance now, really needed guidance, on when is it appropriate to use a credit, right? Because you're basically establishing what should the journey be for corporates to get their emissions down, and only then can you backfill and contribute to your journey by purchasing carbon credits. I can't tell you how important this is, because I believe that there has been sort of an overhang and uncertainty in the market because corporates didn't know whether it was appropriate to use these credits or not. Likewise, we're seeing now governments, through efforts such as the Coalition to Grow Carbon Markets, where governments are coming together and saying this is an appropriate activity. Again, not as a substitute for decarbonization, but in a way to contribute. And so I think what's very important with what SBTi has done is it's made it very clear that, you know, there has to be accountability for getting your emissions down. You know, you can't just sort of buy indulgences, and, you know, as we know, the carbon markets had a bad reputation previously for that kind of thing where, you know, folks were buying credits that weren't high integrity, they were claiming to be net zero. I like to say that that is in the rearview mirror now. I truly believe that to be the case. And the progress that we've made as standard setters, you know, Integrity Council, SBTi, Greenhouse Gas Protocol, I mean, I think we're at a very important inflection point now where we can really get going on this. And I think that's extremely important and very exciting. And I hope that the corporates in this room feel that confidence, that now they have an answer. They have some idea of what the path should be.
Thank you so much, Annette. I think you're absolutely right. Right, we are here because of Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2, but as rightly as some of the panel have pointed out, we are all respectively still on our journeys, and most of us still using version 1 as we look ahead to implementing version 2. But we are all familiar with version 2. So my next question to the ladies on my right really is about the implementation hierarchy, because it is quite a distinct difference between version 1 and version 2. One of the biggest changes probably in the standard. I'd love to get your just initial thoughts and reflections on how you think it changes the way you might prioritize decarbonization actions compared with previous approaches. So Natalie, maybe we start with you.
Yes, so of course we operate with the version 1, meaning that we were really focusing on our direct, I would say, direct access to the supply chain. I'm talking, of course, Scope 3. And we did some strong effort already. So I just want to mention that we were reducing all scope together minus 20% versus 2020. So, of course, now, after such big effort, we think that I would say not the low-hanging fruit, they were not so low, but anyway, those part has been done. And of course, now when we move on, it's getting more and more challenging. And of course, we reach a bit the system, we hit the wall sometimes. So I think this idea of hierarchy is quite interesting in this way, because of the possibility that some of the things we can tackle collectively. Of course, we did already, some strong effort through some coalition. For instance, at Danone, we are with several of you all together in OP2B, where we are creating large-scale project. For instance, in WBCSD, we are also several of us, trying to do that. But I think it's pretty interesting that there is more recognition possible now with those collective efforts to be really accounted nicely in our effort. So I think it will certainly create more thinking around those collective approaches for the ones that are so difficult to tackle. So somewhere you are not the biggest, I would say, off-taker of something, of a commodity, and then you can, join forces to attack something, and then, with some nice support from, I would say, for instance, I remember meeting WWF for, some effort in Brazil when they want to combine and they have this possibility to combine at, I would say, a regional effort, but then how to face us, all the large number of off-takers for this region. I think here there is quite an interesting avenue which is opening now on how to use and to leverage those new possibility of hierarchy, indeed.
Brilliant, thank you, Natalie. And for anyone that's not yet familiar with the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2 and the implementation hierarchy, I'd strongly recommend you go on the website, go online and have a look at it, because it is very pragmatic and it does start kind of from the inside out in terms of the boundaries of our control as organizations and businesses, right the way out to the kind of outer stretches, if you like, of our value chains and where we can collaborate. And I think for some sectors, we've been doing that for a number of years now in different ways, Natalie, to your point, on different agendas, whether it's biodiversity or it's deforestation or it's climate, within production landscapes. At least that's what I'm most familiar with in the food and ag space. But Esther, what does this mean from a Schneider Electric standpoint? How are you thinking about the implementation hierarchy, and where are the spaces that you see greatest opportunity for pre-competitive collaboration with your industry peers?
We like the hierarchy very much because I think it's quite a good and true testament of how things work in practice. So I can give you 3 examples of things we were doing and now that will be able to fit under the hierarchy to explain better what we're doing and how we're counting the benefits. First thing we're doing is to eco-design our offers. Pretty straightforward in the sense that the levers are within our own hands. We optimize the design. We can reduce scope 3, upstream, downstream of the offers we put on the market. Second example is supplier engagement. For the past 5 years, we've been running a program we call the Zero Carbon Pathway, where we contact our tier 1 top suppliers and ask them to reduce their own scope 1 and 2 emissions. In 5 years, they've reduced their own operational emissions by 56%, knowing that in 2021, the start date, 70% of them had never heard of a carbon footprint, scopes or whatever. So minus 56% in 5 years is extremely impressive. But guess what? We were tied in a bit of what I believe is a bit absurd conversation with our auditors, that those minus 50% at their level at the entire emissions of the suppliers. Of course, we cannot tie those minus 56% to the specific screw we're buying, but who cares, right? The suppliers is decarbonizing overall, but this was a bit hard to get recognized. The supplier engagement, activity level engagement of your suppliers translated into what you buy. And then the last example is responsible material. We've been, for the past 5 years, driving the share increase of responsible material sourcing on what we buy on steel, aluminum, and plastics. In some cases with direct purchases, in some cases through group purchasing, all the way to coalition approach. The ability to recognize the power of coalitions when it comes to influencing all the way to demand signaling and buying of those responsible materials is, of course, another way to transform. Whenever you need to engage an entire sector to change or to increase, let's say, the prescription power and align as well on the requirements that will then cascade downstream in the upstream in the value chain. Another example that will be able to fit in the hierarchy. So the hierarchy will help us explain what do we do, how does this impact, and how do we account for the benefits. From an accounting perspective, I would agree, the best or the most accurate way of counting is not always the best way to count, because the good is the enemy of the original. I remember the nice expression used, but exactly. You need to be extremely pragmatic so that you can allow to recognize those different forms and models of engagement, and the hierarchy will definitely help.
Brilliant. Thank you, Esther. I have answer envy. Esther's answers of 3 things each time are brilliant. So I'm going to have to make a note for that. Preeti, what does this look like from an Asahi perspective? How are you thinking about the implementation hierarchy? And where do you see greatest opportunity for you?
Agree with Esther. Totally love the implementation hierarchy. I think, Anna, you said it, inside out, credible, very thoughtful and pragmatic way of approaching it. I think a lot of us are already doing that, to be honest. It was nice to see it as a testament of doing the right thing on a piece of paper from SBTi. Love the activity level. I think, Annette, to your point, you want everybody to utilize the carbon market for the last mile effort. And I think that's what the active level testifies, right? Do the best that you can. Have you looked at every single lever that you could turn to do your own decarbonization internally at the activity level, then move to the pool level, and then move to the sectoral level. When I was talking about something like renewable heat, it's not just my problem, it's everybody in the manufacturing industry's problem. So I think something like this helps us collaborate more. I'm not saying we won't, but I think it just gives a very strong framework to look at it in a very focused way. And then looking at the best efforts, recognizing the pragmatic challenges of there is only one pie and all of us have more than 5 or 6 targets to meet. So where is the investment going to go? Where is it going to have the best bang for our buck? And there is going to be places like PET or packaging and plastics where the technology isn't there yet. Or if it's there, it's not financially scalable yet. So I think the implementation hierarchy gives a very logical way of thinking, but also a very logical way of implementing.
Love that. Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much. I have an eye on the clock, so we've only got a few minutes left. I'm going to pose the same question to my brilliant panel, and I'm going to ask you all to imagine it's 2030. I know that feels quite scary for those of us with multiple 2030 targets looming. So it's 2030, and Annette, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go back down the line. What does success look like in 2030, and what needs to be true to get there?
Well, I think ideally, as I said earlier, I think we're at a real inflection point and we can start to see real progress. So to me, success by 2030 would mean that as many corporates as possible had set their targets and were moving towards greater decarbonization before the 2035 deadline in the SBTi proposal, and that you start to see, in addition, greater activity in the carbon markets as a result. I think that would mean that we just are sort of accelerating our transition, and we won't see as much of a steep climb in 2035. It'll be more gradual. I also think that there are real opportunities here for convergence in all manner of ways. Convergence among standard setters, if you look at the markets themselves, particularly the carbon markets, convergence around, transparency, trade reporting, there are all manner of things, infrastructure type things that need to be, addressed in the carbon markets, and I'd love to see more progress on that, and I think we will, because I think right now, as the markets are a little slow, we have a tremendous opportunity now to address these issues before we start to see more volume. And finally, ultimately, I'd like to see governments, adapting or adopting the standards that we've set. I think the private sector has done a magnificent job of really focusing on these issues in a quasi-governmental way, right? Full notice and comment, great transparency around it. We've taken advantage of all the learning in the markets and the market participants. And if governments take that, ultimately, I think in a perfect world, we would have a single market. It'd be a compliance market. And, I don't think we're not going to get that by 2030. But in a perfect world, we should be moving towards greater adoption.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Couldn't agree more. Preeti, over to you.
I think we're all eternal optimists on this. And that wants to get to one centralized market by 2030. And fingers crossed, I hope we get there. I think for us, 2030 would be very similar. I hope to be popping champagne with my team and everybody saying we did it. But I don't think so. I think success will be a little bit more grounding in 2030 for us. Being able to meet targets is success. Being not able to meet targets is also going to be success, because I think hopefully we don't look at this decade of 2030 as a decade of pledges and commitments. You know, we are in London Climate Week. I'm sure you've all been to 5 other panels today, so have I. And everybody's talking about ambition, commitment, pledges. And I'm truly hoping that we just talk about action and implementation, and in 2030 we have done the best that we could with everything that we had available. That would be success.
Yeah, absolutely. Esther?
In my mind, 2 things are really top priorities. The first one is to deliver on our Scope 1 and 2 commitments. We've taken very ambitious commitments, minus 90% on Scope 1 and 2. We currently sit at minus 80%, but in there, Scope 1 is at minus 40%. Why did we take such a strong commitment? Is that because we want to demonstrate that it's feasible now with efficiency and electrification to sharply cut Scope 1 and 2 emissions, including Scope 1 emissions. So one thing that was not mentioned before is the new corporate guidance separates Scope 1 and Scope 2, which I think is very good, because we need to drive a lot of attention to really reduce Scope 1 emissions, which means more resiliency and less CO2. Second thing that's top of my mind, and I do think the V2 will help, is engaging the supply chain. The way we think about sustainability, we test things, we learn. Whenever we succeed doing something, we immediately try to scale it with our supply chain. And that's why I told you about the Zero Carbon Pathway, our program to engage suppliers. It's as simple as telling our suppliers, hey, guess what? It's feasible to reduce Scope 1 and 2. We've done it. Let's do it together. I think that with the new categorization of companies, acknowledging that there are smaller companies, emerging economies, as well as the pragmatic approach to Scope 3, we now have the tools that will help us accelerate even more supplier engagements. And this is the way to duplicating impact, right? You're achieving one, your entire value chain will achieve 100. And that's how I see success.
Perfect. Thank you. Natalie?
Yeah, so I would love that the most committed company are also the most successful. So which means that beyond, we could have, of course, a disproportionate impact on of course, the carbon reduction, but also that it would signal the entire market that, yes, it's good to be committed. You are more resilient. You have a better reputation. So this is one of my first dreams. The second dream maybe is also that natural-based solution with high integrity are really recognized, because we are sitting on a living planet, and we hope that we can attract more and more fund into those natural-based solutions. So this is for all of us, and I hope that the new standard will also allow and recognize that, because beyond the climate, there is also biodiversity, water management, and so many more. So let's go for a living planet.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Well, we've reached the end of our panel, and it's been such a rich conversation with such fantastic contributions from these brilliant humans. So it's been an absolute pleasure to be here. Hopefully it's given you a little bit more food for thought, as well as a bit more comfort and excitement about the opportunity we have ahead with implementing version 2 of the Corporate Net-Zero Standard. So the last thing is to say, just to give a massive round of applause, please, for this panel. Back to you, Alex. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. Look, thanks so much to Anna and the panel for that. I think what came through there really strongly was just those real tangible examples making this seem possible, but also that sense of collaboration between the standard setters and the businesses, but also between businesses in pre-competitive spaces. This is a really interesting story that's an important part of the success of the framework. Another example of collaboration is that between SBTi and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. An underreported part of our release recently was the joint statement between the two organizations. If you haven't read it, I would recommend that you do. It basically says we're going to be interoperable, but to explain it in more detail, I'd like to invite onto stage David Kennedy and Tim Mohin, CEOs of SBTi and Greenhouse Gas Protocol. Thank you.
Great. Well, look, thank you for bearing with us. We're going to be about 10 minutes, but we are very honored to have Tim with us, and really important that you can see our spirit of working together in partnership. So I'm going to start. I was reminiscing. This time last year, London Climate Action Week, I was about as far into the job as CEO of SBTi as Tim is of CEO of Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So I was going to say, Tim, how's it been?
Well, I'm 4 weeks into the job, so I guess the best analogy is it's kind of like being a plate spinner inside a hurricane, a little bit. No, in all seriousness, I'm so honored and thrilled to take over this role. As my colleague Paulina knows from BCG, I was a consultant to the Greenhouse Gas Protocol for about 2 years. One of the greatest parts of working for BCG is we get these pro bono budgets to support good causes, and GHP was my good cause. And so after setting up the strategy and thinking through how the GHP could mature, they said, well, just come and do it. So here I am. But I'm standing on the shoulders of so many people who came before us and really have set up the foundations of what decarbonization is all about. And so I've called it the 25-year-old startup. Our job now is to really create an international, independent standard setter that meets all the criteria in order to be relied upon by jurisdictions around the world for what we see as the massive change coming, which is moving from a voluntary system into a mandatory system. It's not like we're giving up on the voluntary. We work very closely together on that. But we're also seeing things like CBAM and product carbon footprinting coming into the future. We're seeing mandates. GHP is now required for use in 70 different jurisdictions around the world, and more than 97% of the S&P 500 are using our standards to meet those requirements. And so that's a hell of a thing to inherit. Now, having said that, we're in the middle of six different standards revisions, which is way too many for any standard setter. We have this, ongoing maturity thing. So there's many, many challenges that I think we have to face as an organization. That's a long answer to a short question. I'm just saying it's been a wonderful start. I'm full of, my favorite saying right now is I'm an optimist, but I have my doubts. So that's where we are.
Well, it's great to have you on board as a partner of SBTi. I know you've been working very hard. I'm not assuming you've read the Corporate Net-Zero Standard V2.0 in any detail, but any thoughts you'd like to share on Corporate Net-Zero Standard V2.0?
I think you guys did a brilliant job. I think there was super pressure on you, just as there is on us. Let's face it, this is a very polarizing moment. And I am not sure why we in this community always have these kind of polarized binary kind of decisions. But I think you guys did a brilliant job of sort of finding a good compromise and working with us. We're still in the process of updating our standards, especially on things like Scope 2. And so I think you did an excellent job. I think SBTi really sets the destination, maps the journey to that destination, and what GHP does is we're the instrument panel as you're making that journey. And so we have to work together. David didn't say this, but on the first day, the day of my appointment, there was a press story that we weren't working together very well. And you pulled me up on stage, and we're definitely working much better now. So things are definitely going well.
Great. Okay. So that was the next thing. I have said Tim, getting mixed up with Jim, has dashed across town to get here. I said before you came, Tim, that we will be working very closely together as we go forward. There's nothing in Corporate Net-Zero Standard that is at all inconsistent with your direction of travel. That's right. Market instruments, we have anticipated that direction a little bit with the implementation hierarchy, but in a way that is flexible to where you move forward. But it'd be good for people to hear from you, our shared intention to work in partnership and to be fully interoperable.
Yeah, I mean, that is the intention, right? So One of the things in my short tenure that I have done is set out certain parameters, certain strategic imperatives. You've already heard the voluntary to mandatory. Another is to create a coherent system of standards and frameworks. This is something, if those of you who knew me back in my GRI days, this is very consistent. I think if you're outside this room and looking in, and you're not one of the many experts that are here, this looks like a bit of a chaotic mess. And I'm hoping through our relationships that I've already started to forge with ISSB, ISO, EFRAG, and if you understand all those abbreviations, you're in the right room. We need to coordinate better. I've called it like if you're solving a Rubik's Cube and you get one face entirely right and the rest are all scrambled. I can't keep doing that, and neither can the folks who are using our standards. And so, you know, through our coordination and through those others, I think we'll start to build that coherent system.
Great, okay. And one thought from before, which is people keep coming back and saying, look, you've written in the standard, you should do greenhouse gas protocol-based physical accounting and then account separately for actions and market instruments. What do you actually mean by that before the greenhouse gas protocol has set this out? Now, we will do some interim
technical jargon here, but essentially we're trying to bring these two things closer together. And so that it's not only one way that companies can move. We want to ensure that companies who are ready to invest and already investing in decarbonization are rewarded for that investment. The last thing, and this is very, very important that everybody hears this, that our standards should do is discourage decarbonization. We need to encourage decarbonization. And that is the North Star and the goal that I bring with me into this role.
Great. I think that's probably a good place to finish. But one thing that stuck with me, Tim, from our first conversation, we are a mission-driven organization. Our mission is to support and accelerate the corporate net zero transition, and everything we do is about that. That's the SBTi. I think you said the same thing in our conversation. Mission-driven organization. It's about system transformation. That's what we're both here for. So we are ideal partners.
We are ideal partners. And what I would say to this community is, let's decrease that binary polarization to the extent we can. We haven't, thank you, thank you. We've got enough pressure from the outside looking in. I'm from America, you can hear my accent. Let's not create a circular firing squad amongst ourselves. There's enough passion and energy and knowledge that we can work together, we can collaborate, and when we collaborate, we can do something wonderful.
Great, so look, we're doing pretty well to get that level of enthusiasm at 5:40, end of a hot day, so I think we should leave it there. So it's great to have Tim on board. Thank you.
Well, what more is there to say? Just some thank yous, I think. So what a fantastic set of speakers. Corporate climate action clearly is possible. So thank you to the organizers. It's not easy to put on an event like this on a day like this. Thank you to our founding partners, to our funders, and to all of you and all of the stakeholders involved in moving this system forward. Collaboration is clearly one of the key things that's coming out here. From here, we have an event going on in the conservatory. Conservatory, you think of a really hot space. It's cool in there. I went in there before, I can assure you. So it's just out the doors, and you'll see it on the left as you go out. So thank you to everyone, and look forward to seeing you afterwards, and have a great London Climate Action Week.
Over the past decade, more than 11,000 companies around the world have set ambitious science-based targets. As companies have moved from ambition to implementation, one thing has become clearer. Delivering net zero transformation in the real economy is a complex, non-linear journey. Businesses are facing rising expectations while navigating barriers beyond their control. They're expected to show credible progress, to act faster, to be transparent, and to deliver real emission reductions. That's why the Science Based Targets Initiative has developed the Corporate Net-Zero Standard V2.0, a framework that makes science-based climate action more accessible and aligned with how companies actually operate, helping you to protect value, secure capital, build resilience, and stay competitive. The new standard strengthens 3 key elements. 1, it moves beyond a one-size-fits-all approach, so you can set targets that reflect your company's size, sector, geography, and where you can have the greatest influence. For example, a large shipping company may set targets differently than a small hospitality company in a lower income country. 2, it lets you prioritize actions within your control with a clear implementation hierarchy. Direct productions first, while supporting system-level decarbonization. For example, on-site renewables at a manufacturing plant, or switching to lower emission products like plant-based alternatives. 3, it supports continuous progress. Targets are pursued on a best efforts basis, meaning you should use every lever available and disclosing barriers you can't solve alone. For example, a real estate company may reduce emissions through building retrofits and rooftop solar, while flagging dependencies on grid infrastructure upgrades and low-carbon construction materials. The standard is more than an update, it's a milestone, moving you from ambition to action. That's why we're making key elements available for use by businesses that already have targets and to those setting targets in the coming months using the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 1.3. So whether you're setting targets for the first time or preparing for the next phase of your net zero transition, take the step with the Corporate Net-Zero Standard version 2.